Hello, my name is Alex Roth, and I am doing a presentation today on bridging the gap, which is the achievement gap between Hispanics and white students and African American students and white students. Through this presentation, we will be seeing the contributing factors to the gap, as well as what kinds of things can be done to close that gap. Also, an administrator interview is part of it at a school that has a large Hispanic and African American population and their ideas on how to close this gap. Let's get started. What is the achievement gap? What is the achievement gap? The definition given is it's a disparity in academic performance between groups of students. So it's really this group compared to this group. What is the difference in terms of their academic performance? And often it is based on their scores on standardized tests. And our focus in this report and this presentation is to look at the gap between black or Hispanic students with their white counterparts, white students in schools. So counterparts isn't really the right word, but black or Hispanic students with white students, what's the difference there? On average, black students score 1 standard deviation lower on standardized tests than white students. So that's similar to the gap that would happen between the average 4th grader and 8th grader. 1 standard deviation could be as much as about 34% lower. Could be less than that, but that would be about 1 standard deviation. 1/3 of Latino students perform below their average grade level. So over 30% are below what they should be at for their test scores. When they start at the same level, so let's say we have students that have similar backgrounds but have different or are of different races, white and black. They start at the exact same point. Once they start school in kindergarten, the gap starts and they separate themselves at a 20% of standard deviation rate each year. So white students are opening that gap 20% of a standard deviation every year, even if they start with the exact same skills and intelligence. The things this presentation will explore is the reasons the achievement gap is happening for black and Hispanic students, some strategies for closing that gap, and then the perspective from an administrator at a school with a high Hispanic and black population. Let's get started. The reasons for the African American achievement gap. First, black students are more likely to attend a school with a higher density of black students. So this means that if a student is black, given the student is African American, their school is more likely to have a higher concentration of black students just because of the area they're in. It could be a more urban area, and there is usually a higher concentration, and that can contribute to the lower scores. The higher the density, the larger the achievement gap is, and that's been proven by research. And schools that serve large percentages of black students are more likely to employ less experienced teachers. It could be because of compensation, or because of the job being stressful, or simply because there's not that many experienced teachers in the areas where these schools are. So they're forced to employ less experienced teachers that may even not have as much school experience. With a higher density of black students come a higher percentage of low socioeconomic status families, so they are going to be more in the poverty line. And there is an oppositional culture associated with black students. A lot of times peers can affect and shun students that achieve high in school, so in order to not be shunned by their friends, they will achieve lower. Teachers may have lower expectations of those students just from their own prejudices or something like that. And also the number of discipline reports increase directly with density. So if there's a high density of black students, there's going to be more suspensions, and if you're not at school, you're going to have a lower achievement. Another thing about the reasons here is that a black student in high school is more likely to to be on the honors track if they're in a high density school. But if they're in a low density school, they're more likely to be in the regular track or the lower track. So that's an interesting point as well. More gap reasons and facts. Even after taking socioeconomic status and poverty rates into account, the gap is still present. So they tried to adjust the numbers based on those rates, and it's still present. Adults with similar scores on qualifying exams earn similar wages. So in the adult world, if you are testing, like to get into the Army or something, if you earn a similar score, you're going to earn a similar wage. And that is why the high school years are so important, because if you finish high school and there's a large gap, then you can't close that gap to make a similar wage, and that's why in the job market, Hispanic and African American people are not getting the same jobs because of those test scores. Other factors include birth weight and food programs the family is enrolled in, and those actually contribute a lot to their achievement. And this tells us that there have been strides made in black homes because birth weight and food programs, if those are factored in also with poverty and socioeconomic status, then the gap is closed. So that's great. Racial segregation in schools is happening under our nose, and black students tend to attend worse schools, and they tend to attend schools where there are more black students. Sometimes the expectations of African American teachers are even lower than white teachers for black students, which is contrary to some theories. Most people think that the white teachers would have lower standards, but in this case, the research shows that black teachers may even have lower expectations. Alright, now talking about Hispanic and Latino students. It's predicted that in 2025, 1/4 of all students will be Latino in schools. So that is a huge, huge number. And so being prepared to teach them is very important. 4 out of 10 current students are English language learners, so that means they speak Spanish as well as English, and so that's another big thing. And also 45% of these students attend schools in high poverty areas. There it is. Education of parents is lower than white and African American students, so they're not going to have as many parents that have been through high school, let alone college, to support them. And also, Latino students have the highest dropout rates in the nation, as well as the earliest. So not only are they dropping out often, but they're dropping out in as young as 10th grade. A good thing about the gap is that it has closed some since the 1970s. The gap between them and white test scores has closed, but it's still considerably lower than the white test scores. And then Latino students enroll as often as white and black students at college, but graduate much less. So where white students are graduating about 26%, black students are graduating about 21%, Hispanic students are only graduating 16% with a bachelor's degree. Challenges that Hispanic students face. Many go to more impoverished schools, so their scores are lower. That's just a correlation that there is. And half of those students go to central city schools where there's a higher poverty rate. There is a lack of qualified teachers. There's a larger percentage of uncertified teachers at these central city schools, and and then at schools where there are a higher concentration of white students, there are usually more certified teachers. There are less college prep courses for students of Hispanic descent. There's only 45% of Latinos in those college prep programs and 62% of white students. And this makes it so that they're not ready for college as much, and they have low standards. When there's a lot of white students, especially, teachers have lower standards of those Hispanic students. Low income level in those homes, and parents have a low education level, so there's a lot of low wage jobs, and the parents speak limited English, and sometimes the parents are giving the impression that the students should just come work. And most schools really aren't meeting the ELL needs of English language learners. Either they're over-referring too many students or under-referring, and they don't have a staff that can help all the students that they need, especially ELL students with disabilities. Migrant farm workers move often and education is often interrupted. So Latinos make up 80% of the migrant farm worker students in the nation. So they're moving often, and they can't really get settled in and comfortable with the school before they move for the next season. And finally, undocumented students, even if they're a great student after they finish high school, it's hard to get into a college, especially or let alone work legally after college. So sometimes they can get into a community college, but they can't work legally if they are undocumented. Some shortcomings and some strategies to close this gap. First, school personnel and students of color have a bad relationship with each other. So you have to try to have culturally responsive instruction and have activities to build relationships with them, to meet them and see what they're interested in. Schools don't address the academic needs of these students. They need to create a supportive learning environment where instead of remediation all the time, they're making it tougher. They're trying to higher those expectations. And there need to be some non-negotiable practices that every student needs to be ready for. Teachers don't understand the life of the student. They need to build trust, try to understand where they're coming from, create a guidance plan that the students know they need to follow, bring in guest speakers that have a different perspective, and also educate the parents, if they can, on what their students going through, and even just in adult education programs just to help them learn. The staff is not culturally sensitive to the students. They don't know about the culture, and there needs to be professional training to improve that. And there could be professional training for all of these points, and it would be really helpful. There's also poor peer influences. These students their peers are not into school, and so they will shun them if they do get into school. So you need to support collaboration, get students working together, make academics a huge thing, make high expectations a huge thing, and bring in speakers, work in teams, have single gender classes so they're not trying to impress someone of the opposite gender, and they don't have to look cool in class. Then there's too many students of color in the special ed classes, so we need to redefine what a true student that is special ed and identify them. And we could also have co-teaching, more teachers in a class, and facilitated support where we help and give collaborative opportunities but also facilitate that. Some more shortcomings. Classes are not relevant to the students, so we need to work to scaffold lessons, build them on top of each other, and then we need to try to support out-of-school learning like field trips, and then also exploit the strengths of the student. If you see something they're really good at, try to build off of that. Teachers need to choose appropriate strategies. So thinking maps are something that are good for visual learners or someone that doesn't understand the language as well. Also, we need to differentiate instruction. Don't do the same thing every day, and then use technology, because that is something that all students are interested in, especially Black and Hispanic students. Brain-based techniques need to be used, like cooperative learning, where students are working together in some type of strategy, and also teacher training to learn those techniques. We need to know the difference between conversational language and academic language, but also try to exploit that in a good way. So we should train teachers, first of all, to bridge the gap between those two, and then use language negotiation, which is a balance of language that the students would use and language in the classroom. So try to balance both so that they understand better. Students need a welcoming learning environment. So this needs to be streamlined. If there's a relaxing room where they can work in middle school, there should be a relaxing room in high school where they can work of a similar type. Finally, they're distracted by difficulties in their family. If they're impoverished, if they need to work, that's going to be tough. So we got to give families opportunities like government programs and also adult education to show them how important it is and how much we care about how their students are going to do. Finally, we're going to talk about schools and districts and what they're doing to close the gap and what we need to do to close the gap. Schools and districts that are working to close the gap are culturally competent. All right, they see diversity as an asset and they're sensitive to it. And also they see faculty that can be trained to be culturally competent. They don't think they need to bring in new teachers. They think they can just train their teachers better. These districts are supporting students. They identify early. They figure out who needs help early and continually give them help. They also provide mentors or tutors or peer support for these students, because sometimes those are even better than a teacher helping extra. and then also offer programs before and after school and summer programs so that they can use any time possible to improve. These schools also reach out to families. There's family centers where families can spend time together. There's adult education programs where adults can continue their education or earn a GED, and then translators that can communicate with families, communicate with students, and just make sure that they are fully understanding the importance of what they're doing in school. These schools are also changing what they do in the classroom. So they're varying effective strategies and being very intentional about that. And they're also using research and data to improve what they do. If they try a strategy, they do some type of assessment. If it's not working, they don't use it anymore. These schools also support their schools. The districts support their schools. They show that there's a school-wide responsibility to close that gap. They have high expectations for students. They use data and research, and they start school leadership teams where there's people working together to find what do we need to learn to help these students, what professional development do we need. Finally, a couple more. They're also supportive at the administrative level, so they're trying to decrease class sizes so that we can have more individualized instruction, and then also involve teachers in the professional development. What do we need to learn? And then they focus on improving their staff. They put the highest quality staff with the students that need the most help. Instead of giving them honors classes or college prep classes, they help the students that need it the most. And they also provide compensation for that. So if there's someone that's going above and beyond, doing extra things, they need to be compensated. And finally, they help teachers communicate with families, because that is a big gap, something that's not happening. And if there's support at home there, the students are going to do a lot better. So they help with that communication home. With my interview with an administrator, I interviewed a teacher from a local school that has a high Hispanic and African American population. And I asked them, what do they think about the achievement gap? They said it's something they're aware of and something they're working to close. They have the numbers, and it's not a crazy gap, but still it is evident that they want to close it, and they're working to do that. So one thing they're doing is called SRT time, student resource time, and it's twice a week and allows for extra help and instruction. So teachers can sign out a student to a certain subject, to a certain teacher, and they can go and get extra help, individualized help in different classes, whatever they need to focus on, especially the math and English where our state is tested. Then the ICE program, it promotes job awareness and prepares students for the next life step. They're informed on what kind of jobs are available to them and what they need to do to get ready for those, as well as colleges, what they need to do to get ready for colleges, getting scholarships, all those things. And then finally, the Career Center is a local kind of school where students go for half a day and can learn a lot of different jobs, a lot of different vocations. So there's cosmetology, there's cars, working on cars, there is criminal justice, trying to be a police officer. So there's a lot of career-focused stuff going on there. So those are a few things that they do, and something that we could try to do at our school. Here are the references I used for my presentation, and I really hope you enjoyed it and that we can use some of these ideas and work to close that gap. Thank you.